Hi, I'm Kalis. At 13, I stood barefoot in a blizzard, my stepmother's taillights vanishing into the storm. No coat, no goodbye, just her voice, cold and sharp. You breathe a word, and you disappear. She left me to die. But someone else didn't. They saw everything, every bruise, every silence, every lie. My question is, why didn't anyone else? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from right now? I read every comment. Let's begin. I've been told Michigan winters are brutal, but no one ever talks about what it feels like when the storm isn't just outside you, but around you, inside you. I was 13, and it wasn't the snow I remember most. It was her eyes, Veronica's. They looked straight through me like I was already gone. That morning started like any other, except it didn't. She didn't yell. She didn't curse under her breath the way she usually did when I left a spoon in the sink. Instead, she smiled. "We're taking a little trip," she said while pulling on her gloves. Her lipstick was too red for a grocery run, and she was wearing perfume, something floral and wrong for a snowstorm. I remember thinking maybe she had a date, maybe I was just in the way again. But when she motioned for me to grab my backpack, she said, "Leave your coat, we won't be out long." Stupid me. I listened. The roads got narrower the longer we drove. Thick woods lined both sides, and the snow came down in sheets. She didn't turn on the radio, didn't speak, just kept tapping the steering wheel with her nail. Tap, tap, tap. About 20 minutes in, she slowed near a bend in the road. "Here's good," she muttered. I looked out the window. Good for what? Get out. At first I thought she was joking. Then she reached over, unlocked the door, and shoved it open. "What are you doing?" I asked. The cold slapped my face the second the wind hit. She leaned close. "You breathe a word about anything, to anyone, and I'll make sure you disappear for good. You got me?" I opened my mouth to speak, but she cut me off. "Out." I stepped out in my socks. The cold bit through instantly. Before I could say anything, she tossed my backpack into the snowbank like garbage. "Think of it as a test," she said, her voice too light for the moment. "Let's see if you're really as strong as you pretend to be." And then she drove off. No brake lights, no hesitation, just gone. The sound of the car tires crunching away under the snow stayed in my ears long after she disappeared into the white. I stood there, numb, not just from the cold but from the shock. I wasn't crying, not yet. My body hadn't caught up to my brain. The wind howled, slicing through my sleeves like knives. I looked around. No cabins, no road signs, just miles of trees and snow. Then I spotted it, half buried under ice, snagged on a low branch. My scarf, chestnut brown, hand-knit. My dad made it for me before he died. I don't even remember grabbing it that morning, but somehow it ended up here. I wrapped it around my neck, tight. It didn't warm much, but it felt like him, and that was enough to stop me from collapsing right there. I took one shaky step, then another. The snow crunched beneath my socks. I tried to follow the tire tracks, but the storm was already burying them. Somewhere between the trees I thought I heard a snap, like a twig breaking. I stopped, held my breath. "Hello?" I called out, but the wind swallowed my voice. Nothing moved, but deep in the trees, something shifted. I could have sworn I saw a shape, tall, still, watching. I blinked. Gone. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was real. I didn't know, but I knew I had to move, so I kept walking. I don't remember how long I wandered. My legs stopped registering pain. My fingers were turning colors I didn't recognize, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept moving. Back then, I thought survival meant finding a road, a house, a someone. Now I know better. Back in the present day, I sit in my cabin, the fire crackling beside me. The scarf, what's left of it, still sits on the mantel. It's faded now, fragile, but I keep it there, like armor, like proof. People think survival starts with food and shelter, but it doesn't. It starts with knowing you were never meant to die out there, that someone tried to erase you and failed. A knock. I look up from my journal. Silence. Then I hear the soft slide of paper. I rise, walk to the door and see it. A single envelope. No stamp. Just my name. Handwritten. I pick it up. The handwriting. God help me. I know it. I stood there for a long while, staring at the envelope like it might vanish if I blinked. The paper was aged, edges curled slightly, the kind of envelope that looked like it had been handled too many times, or kept somewhere damp and cold. I crouched down, picked it up with both hands, and let myself feel it. That handwriting, trembling but purposeful, slanted slightly to the right. The same loops in the lowercase g that he used to scrawl across grocery lists on the fridge. The same way he wrote my name on every birthday card he gave me until he died. Except he'd been dead for almost 20 years. I stepped inside the cabin, shut the door behind me, and set the envelope on the kitchen table. My fingers hovered over it, reluctant to open it, like the truth might hit me harder than the cold ever had. The fire hissed in the corner, but I didn't sit down. I stayed standing. My hands were steady until they weren't. Inside was a single folded sheet of notebook paper, lined, torn at the edge like it had been ripped from a spiral. In handwriting that echoed my father's, it read, "You were right to keep the scarf. She lied about everything. Meet me where it began." That was it. No name, no return address. But at the bottom, just below the last sentence, was a single red fingerprint. Dried, pressed like a signature. I ran my thumb along its edge. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen a fingerprint like that since I was 12. Dad had a deep scar on the pad of his right thumb, a ridge of skin where he'd burned himself welding a trailer hitch one summer. He'd shown it to me once, laughing through the pain. "Welders don't wear rings," he said. "They wear reminders." That scar made his thumbprint split slightly, like a lightning bolt ran through it. And now, years later, it was staring back at me, as real as the scarf hanging by the door. Could he? I sat down hard, gripping the edge of the table. My mind wanted to race ahead, to believe, but I knew better. I knew how hope could twist itself into a lie if you let it. Still, something old stirred inside me. Back then, before the blizzard, before the silence, I'd known something wasn't right. Veronica wasn't just mean. She was careful, always locking drawers, making whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Sometimes she'd disappear for whole afternoons, coming back with receipts she tore up in the trash. One time, I dug out half a pharmacy bag that had a man's name on it, someone who wasn't Dad. I didn't understand what it meant then, but I knew it mattered. So I started writing things down. A yellow notepad I kept under the loose floorboard in the back of Dad's study, next to the window with the cracked latch. I logged times, names I overheard, places she said she went but didn't. I copied down half a voicemail I caught her replaying again and again. The night before she took me into that blizzard, I remember standing in the doorway of that study, my scarf already around my neck. Something told me to leave a final note. I wrote, "If something happens to me, it's not an accident. Please find this," and I slid it beneath the floorboard, along with the rest. I never told anyone, never went back. Now, years later, I was staring at handwriting I hadn't seen since that winter, on a page that referenced the scarf, the lie, and the place where everything shattered. But how? How would anyone know unless they'd found the notes, or unless they were him? I read the letter again, slower this time. "You were right to keep the scarf." It wasn't just a comment. It was something only he would have said. He knitted it himself, gave it to me with hands still marked with soot and grease. She lied about everything. Which lie? That he died in a work accident? That his body was unrecoverable because of the fire? And then, "Meet me where it began." The words pulled at something in my chest. The last place I ever saw Veronica's car, its red taillights bleeding into white snow, the tree line, the smell of antifreeze still fresh in my mind, that frozen stretch of nowhere. I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and walked over to the mantel. I lifted the scarf down gently and laid it beside the letter. 2 pieces of a life that never fully closed. The snow kept falling that night, thick and quiet. I didn't sleep. I stayed curled on the couch under a quilt, staring at the fire, thinking through every possibility. Could someone be trying to lure me back? Why now, after all these years? But then again, if this wasn't real, if someone faked this, how did they get the fingerprint right? In the quiet dark, I opened my laptop and pulled up an old satellite map of the area near where it happened. The forest road was still there, marked as unmaintained. No nearby houses, no cell coverage, nothing but pine and silence. I traced the route with my finger. 20 miles out, 2 turns off County Road 8, a right at the fork, past the rusted mailbox with no name. I whispered aloud, as if saying it would steady me. If it's a trap, I'll know. I closed the laptop, took a breath, and glanced toward the window. The wind had slowed, but the cold held steady. My reflection stared back at me, older, sharper. But in that moment I saw the 13-year-old too, the one who kept walking through the snow, the one who didn't cry. And then I said it out loud, just once. Then someone else survived that storm too. I told myself I was just retracing steps. Truth is, I was chasing ghosts. By the time I reached the tree line, the wind had started to pick up. It wasn't the biting kind, not yet, but it carried that warning tone I'd learned to listen to growing up in Michigan, something in its whistle that said, "Turn back now, or don't expect mercy later." I kept walking. The barn stood like a broken rib cage in the clearing, half swallowed by trees that had crept closer over the years. The roof had long since caved in, but the loft still clung on, sagging and slanted like a tired memory. As I stepped closer, my boots crunched over old hay and brittle wood, and my breath fogged the air in front of me. The smell was the same, mildew and rot mixed with the faintest trace of motor oil and hay. I hadn't been here in almost 2 decades, and still my body tensed like I'd never left. I climbed what was left of the ladder to the loft. My gloves made the wood slick, but I remembered which plank to press for balance. I'd done this barefoot as a girl, back when I had no idea how fragile everything was, except me. I reached the far corner. The floor creaked, but it held. Carefully, I knelt and pried up the loose board. And there it was, a scrap of yellowed paper, edges curled, ink faded but still legible. "Dad, if you find this, please don't believe her. She locked me in the attic. She said she'd lie to you." I felt the weight of it before I even finished reading. My fingers gripped the note like it could still stop time. I'd written it with shaking hands, 12 years old, hiding under a quilt while snow piled against the windows, and Veronica's voice sliced through the house below. Back then, I thought if I could just leave a trail, just one honest sentence, someone would find it. Someone would believe me. But no one ever read it. No one ever came. I folded the paper, slipped it into my coat pocket alongside the scarf and the note from the mailbox. My body stayed frozen for a moment longer. Then I stood up and climbed down, 1 foot at a time like coming down from a ledge. Outside, flurries had begun. Not much, just a dusting, but enough to remind me this place didn't care who I was or what I remembered. I knew I couldn't go straight back to the cabin. I needed to warm up, clear my head. So I walked the extra half-mile into town, through the winding trail that spilled out near the old highway. My legs ached from the cold, but the motion helped. It kept me from unraveling. Ironwood hadn't changed much. The hardware store still had the same chipping paint and rusted bell above the door. I stepped inside and stamped the snow from my boots. "Give me a second," a voice called from the back. I looked around. Same rows of tools, same wall of hooks, same radio playing classic rock from a dusty shelf. Then the man stepped out. Tall, wiry, white beard trimmed short, and eyes that narrowed as he took me in. "You're the Winters girl, ain't you?" he asked slowly. I hesitated. "Used to be." He wiped his hands on a rag, nodding like he was seeing a ghost. "Kalis, right?" I gave a nod. "Well, I'll be..." "You got your mama's eyes? But not the rest of her, thank God?" I didn't answer that. He tilted his head. "You just passing through, or..." "Needed a walk," Cold drove me in, I said, glancing at the old heater by the counter. He leaned against it. Funny, you're not the only one came asking about you. I froze. What? Yeah, just last month. Woman, well-dressed, expensive perfume, green Cadillac, asked if you were still around, said she was looking to make peace. He scoffed. Didn't smell like peace. My mouth went dry. Did she say her name? He shook his head. Didn't have to. Looked like trouble with a fresh coat of lipstick. Folks around here remember. We don't forget easy. I managed a thin smile. Yeah? I figured. Rick stepped behind the counter, pulling out a thermos. You want some coffee before heading back? It's bad out there. Appreciate it, I said, wrapping my hands around the paper cup he poured for me. I stayed maybe 10 minutes, didn't ask more, didn't need to. Veronica was back. She was looking for me, and she wasn't the type to search without a reason. As I stepped back into the cold, the wind had picked up. It scraped against my cheeks and found its way under my coat collar. Snow clung to my lashes, but I barely noticed. My thoughts kept circling the same point. If she came here asking questions, then someone told her something. Someone cracked. The walk back to the cabin was slower. Visibility had dropped. Trees blurred into shadows, and the trail vanished beneath the white. But I knew where I was going. My body remembered the turns, the inclines, the exact spot where the air always seemed to shift. I reached the cabin just as dusk settled. Inside, I peeled off my coat, kicked off my boots, and lit the small fireplace. I placed both notes, the one from the barn and the one from the envelope, on the table beside the scarf. The three of them sat like relics of a life I'd buried and never mourned properly. I stood staring at them, my breath shallow. If she's hunting me again. Then someone must have told her I found something. That night, I didn't sleep, and just before dawn, I saw it, tire tracks outside my cabin. The snow told the truth before anyone else did. I rolled out of bed just after 5, not because of a sound, but because of a silence too perfect. The kind that presses into your eardrums until you sit up, heart thudding, unsure why. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out with the fire dying and my nerves coiled tight. My hands reached for the mug beside the bed, only to find it cold and untouched from the night before. I stepped into my boots, pulled on my parka, and opened the cabin door. The wind hit first, sharp and insistent, but it wasn't the cold that froze me in place. It was what I saw in the snow. Tire tracks. Not just on the road, those curved into my driveway, then circled around my cabin like a snake trying to find its tail. Whoever it was didn't just pass by. They lingered. The tracks weren't mine. I hadn't moved my truck in days. And they weren't from delivery either. No driver comes up this far without calling first, and no one calls. I followed the pattern slowly, boots crunching over fresh powder. The path bent around the back of the house, where I kept a small stack of firewood and an old bench that faced the trees. The bench was tipped. The window above it had a crack in the bottom left corner I hadn't noticed before. I walked closer. There it was. The latch had been tampered with. The edge of the window frame splintered like someone tried to force it but stopped. Maybe they saw the sensor light click on. Maybe they realized I was home. Or maybe they wanted me to know they'd been here. Inside, everything looked untouched at first glance. Nothing stolen, no drawers rifled through. But on the kitchen counter, where I kept a short stack of grocery receipts, lay something that didn't belong, a matchbook. Black cover, gold lettering, Sundown Motel, Wausau, W.I. I hadn't been anywhere near Wausau in 2 decades, but I remembered that motel like a bad dream. Veronica once worked there, briefly under a fake name, during a time when she told everyone she was getting clean. She used to flirt with the manager to stay rent-free. I was 12 when she took me there once, promising a weekend away. I ended up sleeping in the back of her car while she disappeared into one of those rooms with a man I never saw again. My breath fogged up the kitchen window as I stared out at the woods, matchbook in hand. Whoever left this didn't want to burn the place down. They wanted me to burn inside. I slipped the matchbook into the drawer under the sink and threw on another layer before heading out to the post box. It sat a quarter-mile down the road, tucked between two birch trees like an afterthought. I made the walk every week, mostly out of habit. No one really wrote me, but today, there was something waiting. One envelope, no return address, my name handwritten in careful, tight strokes, too neat to be casual, too practiced to be innocent. I tore it open, fingers stiff from the wind. Inside was a single photograph. I stopped walking. It was me, age 13, wearing a threadbare sweater and nothing on my feet, standing in the middle of a snow-covered road. My arms were wrapped around my ribs, hair stuck to my cheek from the sleet. I recognized the storm instantly. It was the day Veronica left me in the woods for just 10 minutes that turned into 10 hours. The day I learned how quiet the world could be when no one's coming back for you. But that wasn't what made me tremble. It was the angle. The photo was taken from behind. Someone was watching me that day. Someone had a camera. Someone followed her, or followed me, or both. I stuffed the envelope into my coat pocket and turned back up the trail, eyes darting at every shadow in the tree line. There was no movement, just wind threading through the branches, brushing powder from the pines. Back inside, I locked the door and bolted the window shut with an extra wedge of wood. I lit the fireplace again, more out of needing motion than warmth. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not because of the photo, because of the questions. Who kept that photo? Why now? And how did they know where to send it? I held it under the firelight, letting its edges warm in my hands, but I couldn't bring myself to burn it. Instead, I laid it flat on the table and stared. The silence stretched. Then I heard my own voice, quiet, tired, and sharper than I remembered. She said no one would believe me, and she made sure of it. But someone knew, someone saw, and someone kept it. I went to the small closet near the bedroom, where a stack of moving boxes still sat unopened. Pushed behind an old quilt was the footlocker I hadn't touched since I first left the Midwest. I dragged it out. The lock had rusted slightly, but the combination still worked. Inside, a plastic weatherproof case. Inside that, my journal from age 14, wrapped in a t-shirt, a tape recorder I used to hide under my pillow, and a small brass key with a red tag attached. The tag read, "Church Basement." My throat went dry. I hadn't thought of that church in years. Abandoned now, or at least it was. The last place I ever saw my birth certificate, the last place I saw Veronica cry. She told the priest I was making things up, that I was jealous of her boyfriends, that I had a need for attention. I almost believed her, until that same priest called CPS behind her back. The journal trembled in my hands as I flipped it open. The pages smelled of cedar and mildew. On the inside cover, written in blocky, frantic letters, "Don't go back, they're watching the church." I didn't even remember writing it. I placed the journal beside the photo. My fingers grazed the key. Something about this wasn't just memory anymore. It was movement. Someone was watching then, and someone's watching now. And if Veronica really is back, she didn't come alone this time either. The church had been abandoned for years, until the light turned on that night. I didn't waste time. An hour later, I was back on the road, bundled in 3 layers, with the borrowed Ford rattling beneath me. I'd told Ed, the old man next door, that I was heading to town for groceries. He didn't ask which town. Good. The drive to Wausau was quiet. No music, no calls, just the hum of the tires against icy pavement and the occasional slap of slush under the wheel well. Fog crawled in like it had a purpose, thick, low, and greedy. I followed memory more than road signs. St. Teresa's stood at the edge of the old county line, where the pines grew so dense you could forget what year it was. The chapel's paint had peeled long ago, its front steps sunken and crooked. One window was cracked just enough for someone like me to slip through, so I did. The air inside was sharp with mildew and ash. Rotten hymnals lay in brittle stacks. Splinters from the pews dotted the floor like forgotten teeth. I moved slowly, my flashlight sweeping in long arcs. The old altar still stood, a warped oak slab draped with a faded burgundy cloth. My boots thudded softly as I stepped toward it. Underneath the cloth, I ran my hands along the wooden floor, and there it was, a rug, out of place. I pulled it back, revealing a square cutout with a heavy iron latch, padlocked. I didn't panic. When I was 13, I used to hide in this chapel when things got bad. One time, Veronica had locked me out of the car in a snowstorm for refusing to eat dinner. I'd stumbled to this church and slept behind the altar. I remembered hiding a spare key in the thick brass candle holder beside the Virgin Mary's statue. I found it. It took some wiggling, but the key turned. The hatch creaked open with a sound like a grave yawning. The stairs beneath were narrow, wooden, and cold as bones. I hesitated only a second before heading down. The flashlight flickered once, then held. The basement was low-ceilinged, with stone walls sweating from trapped winter air. Shelves lined the far side, stacked boxes, moldy books, broken crucifixes. But it was the filing cabinet in the corner that pulled me, rusted, heavy, but still locked. I jammed a tire iron into the lip and wrenched. Metal shrieked, hinges cracked. It gave. Inside, things I wasn't ready for. Cassette tapes labeled in dates I didn't want to remember. One read, Jan 11, crying stops after 3 H'ers. Another, Feb 2, cold withheld, response weak. Then, a bundle of drawings, stick figures, red crayon, childish handwriting, mine. And finally, a deep red leather journal, soft and wicked in the hand. I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp cursive, controlled. Kalis, notes for compliance, begin at age 13, signed, VR. My knees buckled. I slid to the floor. There were pages on isolation methods, on verbal erasure tactics, on reassociating physical touch with obedience. She'd written it like a guidebook, a manual, and she'd used me. I didn't know how long I sat there. The air pressed heavy like it wanted me to stay down. But then I heard something, a faint hum, mechanical, subtle. I raised my eyes. Across the ceiling beam, tucked into the corner where the shadows pooled, was a camera, not broken, not old. A red dot blinked, recording, watching. I didn't scream. I didn't move at first. My mind snapped back like a rubber band, and I grabbed the journal, stuffed it in my coat, and sprinted up the stairs. Each step groaned under me, loud and unforgiving. I reached the main floor, heart pounding, legs shaky but moving. I almost made it out the window when a speaker crackled somewhere near the altar. "I told you not to come back, little ghost." The voice, the same rhythm, the same edge she used when I didn't fold the laundry fast enough or missed a note on the piano. Cold, detached, familiar, but older, rougher. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I ran. But I didn't make it far because someone had slashed the truck's tires. The pickup leaned awkwardly, back left tire completely collapsed into the snow like a deflated lung. I stood there for a second, staring. Then I kicked at the frozen ground in frustration and nearly lost my balance. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the rising sense that I wasn't supposed to leave this place alive. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door shut, and dug under the seat until I found the thin wool blanket the neighbor had tossed in as a just in case. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat still. The forest around St. Teresa's chapel was silent, but not peacefully so. It felt watchful, like the trees had eyes and the fog carried whispers. My breath was coming out in fast clouds. I pulled out my phone, barely 11% battery. I tried calling Arthur from the bookstore. No bars. Then I tapped through my contacts. Lorraine, my old friend from Eau Claire. Again, nothing. I knew what dead signal felt like. But this wasn't just dead. This was blocked. I stepped out of the truck, still wrapped in the blanket, and trudged uphill toward a tree line I'd noticed earlier. Sometimes elevation helped. I stood there, boots slipping a little on the icy slope, and raised my phone toward the sky like some desperate antenna. One bar flickered. Then a strange name popped up under the signal info. Galloway Secure Link. My stomach dropped. I knew that name. Vaguely. Veronica had once mentioned it years ago as part of some school-wide safety partnership. But it wasn't just a school. It was private. Surveillance-based, expensive. And now, here, in the woods of Wausau, this tower was the only one my phone could find? It wasn't coincidence. I stared at the blinking bar. A moment later, the bar vanished and a spinning wheel appeared. I yanked out the SIM card and flung it into the snow. The crunch it made as it landed in the frost was louder than it should have been. I was being tracked, and now I had no map, no GPS, no way out. I slid back down toward the truck, my knees burning from the cold and slope. The snow was falling thicker now, and the last hints of moonlight were swallowed by low clouds. I was halfway to the cab when a pair of headlights broke through the woods behind me. At first, I froze. Then I stumbled to the side of the road, waving my arms. The SUV slowed. A sheriff's decal reflected faintly in the falling snow. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a face carved with age and kindness, gray mustache, tired eyes. "You all right out here, miss?" he asked. "Name's Clint, Deputy Clint Avery." I nodded too fast. "Tires were slashed. I need to report a break-in. I was at the chapel." He tilted his head. "That old ruin? Nobody's supposed to be there." "I know, but someone's using it, watching people. There's a basement with surveillance, notes." His brows lifted slightly. All right. Let's get you warm first. Come on." Inside his patrol vehicle, the heater roared like a furnace. He handed me a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee and draped a thick thermal blanket over my lap. I mumbled a thank you, cradling the heat between my palms. For a moment, I believed I might be safe. Back at the station in Ringel, the place was empty. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint ticking of a wall clock above the booking desk. Clint walked me inside, helped me into a plastic chair near the radiator, and said he'd start the report while I thawed out. "Make yourself at home. You need anything, just holler," he said, then stepped outside, phone to his ear. Something about the tone in his voice made me turn. I couldn't hear words through the thick glass, but then the door opened just enough and I caught it. "Yeah, she's here. What do you want me to do with her?" He said it low, like it wasn't the first time. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just listened as the familiar ache in my chest returned, like someone had twisted a knife just beneath my ribs. Veronica. Even here, even in a tiny sheriff's office hours from home. She was still one step ahead. I looked around, one-way mirror to my left, coffee machine behind me, a row of lockers, a red exit sign blinking above a back door, and my own reflection. I looked terrible. Windburned, hair sticking out under my beanie, my cheeks splotchy, eyes hollow, but it wasn't the appearance that hit me, it was the memory. Red gloves. Veronica had given them to me when I was 13. "To keep your fingers safe from frostbite," she said. And then, 2 nights later, she locked me outside during a blizzard because I didn't speak with proper tone. Those gloves were in the church basement, folded, clean, untouched. They weren't given out of love, they were props. Just like the journal, just like everything else. I was a test, a case, not a daughter. I didn't cry, not this time, but my legs started moving before my brain fully caught up. I stood, walked quietly toward the exit, pushed the handle down slow so it didn't click. The storm outside slapped me in the face as I stepped out, but I welcomed it. Cold didn't hurt the same way betrayal did. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to vanish before they erased me again. The cold bit through the seams of my boots as I trudged away from the sheriff's station, each step breaking fresh snow. My breath came out in short clouds, and the icy wind gnawed at the back of my neck as if even nature had turned against me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If Clint found that I'd slipped out before he returned, I had maybe 5-10 minutes at most before he'd be on the road again, looking for me. But I was done being found. The road out of Ringel narrowed into 2 frozen lanes, one leading deeper into pine country. I stuck to the edge, trudging through snowbanks up to my calves, my socks soaked, my jeans stiff from the freeze. My thighs ached, my left heel burned where the skin had rubbed raw, but I kept walking. There was no destination, just a direction, away. About an hour in, the sky began to shift. Not sunrise, not yet, but that deep blue-gray before the light breaks. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, and I wrapped my arms tighter around my chest, trying to conserve warmth. Up ahead, the silhouette of a roadside diner appeared, closed for the season, windows boarded. But the small awning out front offered just enough shelter from the wind. I ducked under it and slid down to the icy ground, curling up as tightly as I could. The blanket I'd taken from the station was thin and already stiffening with frost. I pressed my cheek to my knees and closed my eyes just for a minute. Headlights cut through the early haze. I squinted. A pickup truck slowed as it approached. Not a patrol vehicle, no markings, just a dusty Ford, paint chipped at the corners. I tensed. I had no energy left to run, but every part of me screamed not to trust it. The engine idled. The driver's door creaked open. A man stepped out, his boots crunching the ice. Heavy coat, gray knit hat pulled low. He moved slow, like he knew any sudden gesture might send me bolting. I watched his eyes. They looked familiar. He didn't speak at first, just studied me for a moment. Then, quietly, like someone saying grace before a meal, he murmured, "Kalis." I stiffened. "How do you know my name?" Instead of answering, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. Edges curled, colors faded. He knelt and held it out. I took it, hands trembling. It was me, 5 years old, missing my front tooth, in a yellow sundress, holding a stuffed bear with one arm. Beside me stood a man. This man, his hair darker, arms around my waist. On the other side was a woman I didn't recognize, but I did, because that photo was one of the few things I'd found at the abandoned church. In the drawer, the one Veronica said was just junk. My voice barely worked. When was this? Your 5th birthday. Right before... He looked away for a second. Before everything changed. I stared at him. Who are you? He looked me in the eye. I'm your father, Kalis. My head reeled. That's not possible. My dad died. Veronica said. She lied. He didn't flinch when he said it, just stood, offering me a hand. I didn't take it. Not right away. But I followed him to the truck. The cabin sat maybe 10 minutes from the state line, tucked into a row of pine trees, chimney smoking. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. He handed me a thick sweater, fresh socks, and an old pair of wool slippers that didn't match, but felt like heaven on my feet. I sat on the couch, still clutching the photo. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. You were never supposed to be with her, he began. I fought for custody after your mother died. I had court-ordered rights, but Veronica had money, connections, and no shame. She forged paperwork, made it look like I'd disappeared. Why didn't you come find me? I whispered. They threatened jail. Said if I showed my face again, they'd file charges, make it look like I kidnapped you, and I believed them. I thought maybe you'd be safer with her. I shook my head. She told me you died, in a car crash, when I was 4. He gave a dry, bitter laugh. That crash? That was her ex, not me. He wasn't related to you, not by blood, not by name, but she used his death to cement her story. I leaned back against the cushion, staring at the ceiling. All those years, birthdays spent alone, holidays where I stared out the window, wondering why no one ever came back for me. I wanted to come, he said again, softer. I wrote letters, hundreds, kept copies. I just didn't have a way in, not without hurting you more. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt too tight. He stood and walked over to a wooden drawer by the fireplace, opened it. Everything's here, letters, certified court filings, even a custody reversal order from years ago. It was never filed. He held out a folder. If we move now, he said, we can make sure she never hurts you again. I took the folder. It felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I held the paper in my hand and realized I wasn't the one on trial anymore. She was. The courthouse sat quietly beneath thick, gray skies, snow curling across its steps like smoke, the kind of winter morning that clung to your ribs and made your breath come out sharp. My boots crunched softly over packed ice as I walked beside the man I'd only recently begun calling Dad again, a local legal aid. Paula, mid-40s, blunt-cut hair, and a warmth that cut through the cold, walked on my other side, clutching a file folder tight to her chest. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, nothing grand or intimidating. But to me, it might as well have been the Colosseum. The ghosts I'd carried for decades were about to be named out loud in front of strangers. And one of those ghosts, Veronica, was already seated at the front, draped in a pristine white coat, sipping something from a silver thermos, like this was just another Thursday errand. She caught sight of me, and her lips twisted, not quite a smile, more like a smirk someone forgot to iron flat. She leaned toward her attorney and said something too quiet to hear, then sat back, visibly relaxed. "This'll be over in 5 minutes," she said to him, just loud enough for me to catch it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't shrink from her voice. I looked straight at her and said clearly, "Good morning, Veronica." She flinched. It was subtle, but I saw it. Her name hadn't left my lips since the night she left me bleeding, barefoot in the snow. Just hearing it come from me now, the tone I used, the absence of fear, knocked something loose in her. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, entered. "All rise," the clerk called out, and I stood straighter than I thought possible. After the formalities, the judge asked for opening statements. Paula stood beside me. "Your Honor, we're here today not to argue memories, but to examine records, legal, medical, and otherwise, that shed light on a pattern of deception." Then it was my turn. I stepped forward and handed the judge a sealed folder. My fingers didn't even shake. "These are original custody papers," I began, including a court order that was never filed, and letters written to me by my biological father that were withheld. The judge opened the file, scanning quickly. I continued, voice level, almost too calm. "When I was 6, I was taken from my home during a supposed visitation. I was told my father had died in a car crash. That wasn't true. What was true is that Veronica forged guardianship papers and used an expired restraining order to keep him out." A few people in the courtroom gasped. One woman, maybe a reporter, dropped her pen. "I was raised believing I was a burden, that I was lucky to have a roof over my head. Until one night, she left me outside, on purpose." The judge looked up from the documents. "You're saying you were abandoned?" I nodded. "It was below zero. I was barefoot. She locked the doors behind me and drove off. I thought it was punishment, but now I know it was planned." Veronica's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, we object to this characterization. My client—" The judge held up a hand. "We'll hear her out." Veronica's eyes narrowed. Her lips pressed tight. When the judge turned to her, asking if she wanted to respond, Veronica stood slowly, her white coat brushing the bench behind her. "Your Honor," she said with faux sincerity, "I've raised Kalis since she was a toddler. She was always different, troubled. She'd run off, make up stories, claim people were hurting her when they weren't. I had no choice but to seek medical care for her. It's all documented." She snapped her fingers toward her lawyer, who slid a stack of papers onto the judge's desk. "These are her psychological records. Her therapist once diagnosed her as emotionally unstable, prone to—" But Paula was ready. Calmly, she produced another set of documents. "That therapist," she said, "submitted a correction. These are the updated notes. She states that the client's symptoms were consistent with emotional neglect, not delusion." Then came the next blow. Paula reached into her folder and placed a single CD on the table. This voicemail was recovered from Ms. Veronica's home line, time-stamped the night Kalis went missing. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Play it." The courtroom fell into silence as Veronica's voice crackled through the speakers. "I told you she'll be out of the way by midnight. Don't call this number again." No one moved. Veronica went pale, her jaw tightening. Then I pulled out one last item, a tiny, delicate snowflake charm on a snapped silver chain. She tore this off my neck the night she left me, thought I wouldn't remember, but I kept the chain. I kept it, and now I remember everything. My voice didn't shake, Not once. I looked her dead in the eyes when I said it. Veronica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Veronica, under oath, did you or did you not leave the plaintiff alone that night? Veronica hesitated. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter sound. She was always so dramatic. I only followed her to make sure she got lost far enough. Her lawyer visibly winced. Excuse me? The judge said sharply. I went to look for her after she ran. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The judge scribbled something down and spoke in a clipped tone. An investigation will be opened immediately. Child Protective Services, please remain for post-session interviews. Court is adjourned pending further evidence review. As the gavel struck, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Veronica stood frozen in place, her white coat now a costume she couldn't hide behind. I walked toward the exit with Paula and my father beside me. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Microphones, cameras, lights flashing. My father leaned close, voice low but steady. You did what they said you couldn't. You brought her to justice. I didn't answer right away. The snow had started again, light flakes catching on my sweater sleeve. Justice wasn't just for me, it was for every child she ever tried to erase. Weeks passed. The snow still lingered, soft and quiet, blanketing everything like a secret finally at peace. I had moved into a modest cottage on the edge of Duluth. The fireplace cracked every evening. The lake beyond my backyard stayed mostly frozen, though the sunlight had started breaking through, leaving streaks of warmth across the ice. One morning, a pale yellow envelope slid through my mailbox, tucked between bills and a grocery flyer. I knew it was from my attorney before I opened it. His neat handwriting had always been precise. Like every letter had a reason for being there. Inside were 2 pages. The first confirmed what I already suspected. Veronica's foster license had been officially revoked. The county's investigation had gone deeper than expected. Testimonies came in from kids I never knew existed, each story eerily similar. Lost shoes, locked doors, words that cut like winter wind. But what stopped me cold wasn't the report. It was the second page, a letter, no name, just a sentence scrawled in unsteady blue ink. I wish we had known what she did to you. I'm sorry we didn't ask. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The tea in my mug went cold. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just still. Sometimes silence isn't empty. It's a kind of truth, too. The next weekend, I drove out toward the county line. The blizzard that had trapped my past had long passed, but the roads still bore traces of it. Frost-bitten trees, the hush of packed snow under my tires. I parked near the edge of an old trail, the one from that night. I walked. Not fast, not afraid, just forward. The wind was gentle. The cold didn't bite the way it used to. When I reached the field, the exact one where I'd once been left barefoot, I stopped. It hadn't changed much. The trees still leaned inward like they were trying to protect something. The slope where I'd stumbled was softer now, covered in a dusting of new snow. I reached into my coat and pulled out the necklace. The chain was fixed, the snowflake charm whole again. It glinted faintly in the light, like a memory refusing to fade. I fastened it around my neck, the metal cool against my skin, but it no longer felt like a scar. It felt like armor. Behind me, I heard the crunch of boots on snow. My father had parked further back and caught up without saying a word. When I turned to him, he looked older than I remembered. Not broken, not defeated, just stripped bare. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer excuses. He just stood beside me, his voice quieter than the trees. I should have protected you. I failed, but if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life showing you you're not alone. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. We just stood there, together, in the place where everything ended and began again. In the days that followed, I started something I wish had existed back then. A small fund, just enough to make a difference for girls aging out of the system. Not a handout. Something real, something lasting. I called it the Snowlight Fund. The plaque was simple. brass mounted on the stone wall of a shelter downtown, for the ones who were left behind and chose to walk forward anyway. I visited it the day it was unveiled, ran my hand across the letters like they were written into my bones. I could hear laughter from inside, the kind that rang from deep in the chest, not polite or careful. Real. Alive. A little girl in a purple coat dashed past me, her mittens flapping as she chased after a snowball. And just like that, I smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear to keep others comfortable, the kind that comes from somewhere hard-earned. That night, as I sat by the fire, watching the snow melt off the edge of the windows, I thought about all the scars people carry, some loud, some buried, and some, like mine, quiet but never forgotten. Sometimes the people who were supposed to protect us become the ones we need to heal from. But healing isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to bury. And if you're reading this and you've been through something like that, if you've carried a wound in silence and somehow kept walking, I hope you know that makes you braver than most. Have you ever carried a scar that became your strength? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.